Becker, who is from Bernie Becker Mastering in Pasadena still, right? And he's going to tell us a little bit about the Loudness Wars. You're welcome to take sides.
Well, like Aspen said, I'm a mastering engineer. I work with my dad. He mainly deals with one of our major clients, so I'm kind of left to fend by myself for our Pasadena mastering facility. Been working there for many years now, and really blessed to have that job, being able to work with family. You know, this talk though isn't about Bernie Becker mastering. It's about the Loudness Wars and how to survive it. And I believe that we've all heard about the Loudness Wars, right?
What?
Yeah. The amount of digital compression and limiting is to say the least, extreme these days. And I'm sorry to say, as much as we all as audiophiles want to see the end of the Loudness Wars, especially with the integration of EDM music or electronic music into popular music, I will say that at least in popular styles of music, until we have a new format, the Loudness Wars are not going away. In fact, five years ago, we were all saying, and I'm sure Kevin's in the same boat. We were all saying, "Oh, this is the loudest it could get. There's no way it can get louder," and it got way louder, exponentially louder. I got to set up. I want to make sure we're loud enough here to hear. Okay, so this is the CD version of Hotel California, which we all love, right? Anyone hate Hotel California? All right, well, one or two. Okay. This is mid-90s. Next is this file right here, which is okay. So that's from Hotel California, which is okay. Next is Rolling in the Deep, Adele, which is a pretty acoustic throwback record, we call it. I know it sounds like this, right? And now where we stand in where EDM music has met popular music. This is the loudest test. -6 RMS, peaking at 0. And back to Now I'm sure that was louder than any Sapphire clap to date, but as you can see, we have got louder. This record, when it was released, was pretty loud.
I think the word you want is uglier.
Uglier. Well, but this right here is where music has gone. We, you know, when records started, when records like Adele came out, -7 RMS, and we'll talk about RMS in a bit. This was like, man, that's slammed. But we're still pushing the boundaries in the music industry. And so here we are. Yeah.
Hit square waves.
So now I'd like to look at this. I'm gonna move this over. But these are mixes I've been getting. Okay. Okay. So was the level okay for you guys, or was it too loud? It's good. Okay. What? Okay. So this is actually one of my dad's mixes. This isn't what traditional engineers would call a mix. There's like transients. You see those lines? Yeah. Transients, you know. Okay. High teens in the RMS. Okay. This is another pretty decent, moderately loud mix. Okay. This mix is at -7 RMS at the loudest sections, which is louder than most mastering engineers ever want to make a record. And the main difficulty, we could pull the lights up for now so I can see people. I feel like I'm talking in a dark room.
You are.
It's kind of creepy.
Why don't you use that laser pointer instead of running back and forth?
All right, sounds good. I'm going to use the laser pointer today. Now, the main difficulty of working with mixes of such drastic difference. Now, working on a record with different producers, I will see on the same record, I will get a mix like this, I will get a mix like this, and I will get a mix like that. Oh, I didn't use the pointer. Crap. And
Use digital indication.
and digital indication. And the problem is that when we have such a big difference in compression and limiting, there is no good middle ground that can be achieved. If we take the soft mixes and try to limit them as loud as this limit, as loud as this has been made, it's going to be we would literally kill these mixes. Or if we made it, you guys also noticed how bright that was. If we made those mixes as bright as this mix, we would ruin those mixes. The mixes would fall apart. Now, if we make the soft mixes, if we take those and we make them moderately loud, moderately competitive, and then we turn down this mix and make it darker, guess who's going to be pissed off? The guy who mixed this song. And that's exactly what happened to me 2 months ago. These examples to the right, and I can't play these for you guys, but I cannot. But these mixes are mixes off of a record I recently did. It went #1, but it's not a story that ended well for me. But to protect the privacy of all involved, I won't tell you what it was. But what happened is I mastered a whole album worth of material from different producers. We got 16 songs in, mastering songs like this and songs like this to match a single that was #1. We matched the single, which was moderately loud, okay? It was already pretty loud. And my instructions were to make mixes like this, about as loud as these, the single that was already out. Label was happy, the artist was happy, the engineers were happy, the producers were happy, even the A&R guy was happy, okay? And that rarely happens, okay? But at the very end, I received this mix by the big producer who delivered his mix 2 weeks late. And this was the next forthcoming single. So because we had mastered everything to match the original single, and everyone was happy, I took this mix and I turned it down to half dB, and it was very bright, so I made it a little darker, more listenable, in my opinion. I thought I made it better. The producer got the mix, and within 24 hours, someone else was mastering the record.
Whoa.
Gone. And I don't tell you the story because I'm upset, or I'm trying to throw anyone under the bus here, or even to say I was right and they were wrong. But I wanted to bring this to your guys' attention because this is the exact reason that loudness wars are not going away. I mean, personally, I'm okay with everyone involved in the project. We still work together. You know, everything's a-okay. But this is why loudness wars are not going to go away. Because there's always someone else willing to make it louder than you. And, you know, it's like this. You know, it's like everything is surrounded, the whole industry is surrounded around singles, around your son and daughter's iTunes playlist, okay? And what record companies want is they want their single, you know, who cares about the whole record? They want their single to be the loudest thing in your kid's iTunes playlist, or your grandkid's iTunes playlist, or your iTunes playlist. And so producers will send their mixes to 3 or 4 different mixers. So what do the mixers do? They make their mixes as loud as possible to get the gig. What do mastering engineers do? They test master. Well, what sounds better these days? Louder sounds better. So it's this whole movement toward loudness, 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 loudness.
This is mastering to what medium?
This is mastering just to a digital wave.
Okay.
We'll call it a wave format. Yes.
It's not like mastering a phono disc.
No.
Thank you. For CD or for iTunes?
Both, and both. Sometimes the CD master is ripped directly into iTunes, and sometimes there's actually a secondary master made specifically for iTunes.
Do they even bother with full wave files anymore, or they just make it all MP3 if they're going to do that? Why bother?
Well, I could go into master for iTunes a little bit more, but basically it's a 20. You deliver iTunes a 24-bit file. iTunes and Apple is really trying to help by allowing us to deliver up to 2496 files to their mastered for iTunes system, and they use a proprietary software to bring it down to their lossless format. And while I can say that it is not lossless in the least, anyone in this room could sit there and do their blind test inside their software. I can pull up their software for you to show you. Anyone can tell the difference in this room. All you got to do is be able to hear over 2K, and you're pretty good. But the thing is that at least they're trying. They've given mastering engineers a kind of a guide to mastering for iTunes, and they recommend one of the main, and already off my topic, but one of the things that they are trying to do is encourage mastering engineers to send files in, these 2496 files, or I send them in 2440 because their SRC sounds awful. So anyway, so we send the files in, but with a peak of -1 or -0.5, or just not minus, just not 0. Because as soon as any file that's fully normalized like that and as dense as it is converted to into another medium, the AAC format, there's going to be intersample distortion just from the conversion process. And that's one of the reasons of many that MP3 sounds so bad, is because people convert fully normalized files into MP3, which automatically means that there's a dB more distortion from the actual making of a file that wasn't there in the first place. If you want a decent sounding MP3, turn the file down 1 dB before you make the file. What were you going to ask?
Yeah, I wanted to tell you why you lost the job, because you did a good job. That's the problem in this business. A lot of times we do what's right, but they choose what's wrong. And your case happens, I don't know, I can't talk about every mastering engineer in the world, but I've talked with a few, and those were more than a few. It happens to everybody.
It happens all the time.
And the problem is that people make decisions based on nothing. There's no reason for it. Just a minute of thinking.
Well, what ended up happening was the big producer got his mastering engineer on the job, and they made all the other mixes as loud and sounds like his mix, to the detriment to the rest of the record.
What about the first single? Did they mess with that?
Yes, they did. It got remastered to match the new single.
And they advertise it as digitally remastered.
Basically,
Yes.
they ruined the album to fit that song.
There was a couple songs a lot of the songs made it okay, but there was a couple songs that just couldn't handle that sort of loudness, that sort of density, and it fell apart. It was also very bright, so a lot of the mixes, as you know, when you add lots of EQ to something to make it bright, the balances change. So shakers were 5 dB louder balance-wise than they were from the original mix. A lot of that sort of stuff.
By the way, they're not called shakers in that level, they're called crackers.
Crackers. but I diverge. I don't mean to, I don't have any, bitterness inside of me for what happened or any of those people. I just wanted to share that with you to give you an indication why things are the way they are. And while I personally feel 100% that we need to support endeavors to reestablish the existence of a more natural and appropriate dynamics in recorded music. I also feel a serious need to educate engineers how to best work within the confines of today's popular music industry. Regardless of how we personally feel about the sound quality of loud music, each engineer will ultimately face clients' demands for louder music. No corner of the music industry is immune either. I mean, some of the loudest masters in the past year have been folk music and orchestral music.
That Adele song is pretty surprising.
Yeah, that's minus, that Adele master is -7, which is about as loud as I ever thought masters would get. And so what I'm about to say is no attack on being an audiophile. It's no attack on being like Kevin Gray, who on his website says, "I will not make your music loud." You know, Kevin is an awesome engineer. I look up to him, and you know, if he can make a living doing what he does without having to put up with what I have to put up with every day, more power to him. So this is not a slight in any way, but what I do want to do is share some information for those of you who are maybe more traditional in your approach to recording and mixing or producing. More traditional in the sense that this whole loudness thing came up out of nowhere, and you're like, well, why can't I make a beautiful sounding recording, and why does it sound wrong in an iTunes, you know, to people in an iTunes playlist just because it's 3 dB quieter? Some of the information I want to share is to make this loudness that is occurring sound as best as possible. Because we could just not work anymore and just make awesome sounding recordings and kind of high-five each other. But what I would like to do is talk about and partner with people to make maybe not this, but maybe something like this sound as great as possible and change the industry that way. Hopefully this will get a bit of information for the more traditional engineers, how to kind of survive and operate in a more compressed and competitive atmosphere. And for those of you who are equipment manufacturers, hopefully I don't bore you to death, but I really think that this could be beneficial to you as well, knowing where popular music is, and possibly bring about a new idea. I don't know.
So are you suggesting the new RIAA curve?
Yes.
Basically, for...
Yes, that's exactly what I'm doing. But so, I just want you guys to know, I'm humbled to stand before you. I don't think I know it all. Just take everything I say with a grain of salt. But this is where I've come over many years of trial and error, of trying to figure this out, trying to make the clients who want this, give them as best product as possible. Fair enough? Fair enough?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me suggest that we all have kind of questions as he goes through this. Let's hold it to the end and make all your points, and maybe you can have a question period at the end. And then we don't have a constant interruption.
And feel free to cut me off. I don't think I'm going to go very long.
I just did.
Yeah.
But I do want you to get through all your points without because you know, I want you to have a wonderful subject, and I want to hear all you have to say.
Cool. Thank you. So now when standalone audio mastering services were first being pioneered, I mean, back when, mastering was something very different than what it's become, right? It was about preservation and fine-tuning. It was about Doug Sachs taking his EQ and adding a click of high-end because it just sounds better. I mean, it was about the final 1%, if that. Preservation. And recently, as the loudness wars become more and more a force to be reckoned with, I found people bringing in mixes. Their only instructions were make it sound like Maroon 5. Make it as loud as Maroon 5. Make it as punchy as Maroon 5. The only problem with that is that because mastering becomes the final 30% or 50%. People bring you a dark, quiet mix and expect you to add 12 to 15 dB of gain to get it there and expect it to sound the same. You know, it's like make it sound like Maroon 5 regardless of the cost. What I would like to do is make your recording sound as great as I can make your recording sound. I'll get it as loud as I can without it falling apart, but people are like, no. Just make it like Maroon 5. We don't care. So mastering has become that final 50% in some cases. It's like remixing and re-energizing all from a single stereo mix. The problem is when you have to add, like I said, when you have to add 12 to 15 dB of gain, you're always trading sonic quality for the level. EQ is another problem. I have people who bring in these dark, murky mixes, and they want it to be made as bright as this. Well, like I said, when you add, you know, instead of me being like Doug Saxon, adding a click of high end to a really good mix, I'm using 3 EQs, all adding between 3 and 5 dB of high end, and it's still not bright enough, into a bunch of de-essers that are trying to take care of these big transients, right? So, adding 12 to 15 dB of apparent gain to your mix, and then 10 dB of top, the mix falls apart. No longer is it optimization of your mix, it's just, it's matching it to something to its great detriment. So what this is all going to say is that if your clients want a super loud master in the end, some preparation has to be done. Your mix has to be headed in that direction to get there, with the end result in mind. One of the main reasons that loud masters sound so bad is because they're not made from mixes that were ever intended to be loud. And we're gonna go into this a little bit more. My clients and I have through trial and error found ways of implementing limiting and compression in the mix in the mix stage to yield more level at the mix stage while maintaining higher standards of audio quality. That means we don't have to take incredible amounts of EQ and digital limiting all at once in mastering to make a competitive master, leading to masters that sound really good and loud without being hashy and completely blown out like we're used to hearing. And I mean, it would be better if we could not make masters as loud. I mean, all of us would say that the Hotel California CD sounds the best, right? Honestly?
Yeah.
I think it sounds the best. But the bottom line is that our work not only has to be high quality, but it has to be relevant to the marketplace that your client is going to take it. Making a product that is both competitive, relevant, and sonically awesome is kind of my mission in life. What I am talking about here is actually taking mastering and coming full circle and bringing it back to its proper place. Being the final couple percent, the fine-tuning, the preservation of a mix. But in order for me to be preservative making loud masters, some preparation has to have been done during the mix stage. And I know all this is raising a lot of questions, so and we'll get to them at the end, and I probably irk some people in the room, hopefully not too bad. So what about leaving room for the mastering engineer? Everyone's heard, oh, you got to leave room for the mastering engineer, and this is true in a very traditional sense. But we're talking about loud recordings here. You know, we do need room to work. Mastering still needs room to work, but maybe not like you think. Many people make the mistake when it comes to loud mixing and loud mastering that all a mastering engineer cares about is the digital peak of a mix. People call me and they're like, you know, -1, -2, -5, -10, what do you want? You know, and they'll take their severely limited mix and just turn down the output. So it's just limiting more. Give me -10 or whatever. You know, I've heard that, oh, mastering engineers, you know, just, you know, -3, just don't pass -3. But peak is only the part of the equation in this. RMS values are also really important as well. as we were looking at the meter and listening to masters, let me pull this over, and this is just a plug-in version, but you have your peak values and your RMS values. And the RMS value it needs to be taken into account, because the RMS actually has to do with apparent volume and density. For example, if your label wants a super loud master, which would be, in my opinion, a loud master would be like Adele. I knew I shouldn't eat that food, I'm going to be burping all night. But peaking at minus 0.01 with RMS values at or above minus 7 RMS is that Adele master. And I would recommend, you know, if you want to go here and not have your mix fall apart in mastering, you can't expect me to take it to minus 7 without your mix falling apart if your mix RMS is 12 to 15 dB quieter than that with the same peak. We need to prepare to go there. We need to, so my recommendation generally is to leave me a minimum of 2, and you know, Maor, and you know, we all have different things, and none of us are wrong per se, but what I would recommend is a minimum of 2, but a maximum of 5 dB to add an apparent level in mastering. Not peak, but RMS. And this is so where we would be mix-wise, you know, if we're here in the master, your mix would be between here and here with a minus, you know, I always recommend like a minus 1 RMS, I mean a minus 1 peak, so that your, the minus 1 peak so that your, you don't have the inner sample distortion on playback, which will happen if you're, oh sorry, I guess I better use this.
It's easier for everybody.
There you go. Double click. Boom.
There you go.
Okay, there we go. I pointed.
Leave it off. There you go.
I pointed. All right, I'm going to leave it. So what we're doing is we're preparing our mix for loud mastering, and we're just preparing to go there. So by mixing with RMS in relation to peak in mind, you are both leaving the mastering engineer room to work, but also not leaving him with the requirement of adding tons of gain and limiting to achieve a certain loudness to match whatever's out there, to match Adele, to match Maroon 5. The end result is a competitive master that still sounds like your mix. One of the things I hear most about other mastering engineers, you know, and complaints from the clients is that, you know, they'll send something off to Sterling, and they won't properly prepare their mix for this kind of treatment, and they go to Best Buy, they buy the mix, you know, they buy the record that they're mixed on, they work so hard, and it's just shambles. And it's because Sterling is going to take it that loud, and if your mix falls apart in the process, that's not really their problem a lot of the time. You know, you should have known, I guess. So that's why I'm talking. And like I said, we're strictly speaking loud and competitive masters. This doesn't apply to everything. But if you do need a loud and competitive master, again, and you do want to apply this sort of instruction on how to best prepare your mix for this kind of loud mastering, how do we implement, how do we mix with like a minus 12, minus 15 RMS with a minus 1 peak? I mean, how do we get there from where we are? And I want to share some things that I've just worked out with some clients. I work with some very specific client base, and a lot of them are EDM and pop producers, which mean that they want everything as loud as possible. So what I've had to do, because really we're all, as engineers, we're servants, and if they need something, I want to do my best to give it to them with the highest quality possible. So one of the simplest things you can do is either on your stereo bus, you know, on your console or in the box, some sort of analog brick wall limiter on your stereo bus. And I know for in the traditional sense, you know, as engineers, that's like a total no-no, right? I mean, seriously, is brick wall limiter on my mix? Yeah, right. But there are many ways of doing this that don't leave a massive distorted footprint, leave your mix hashy. There's actually, you know, a couple of these things that I'm going to just share with you. There's some limiters that aren't even in the path. I mean, it's not like a true bypass situation, but the actual limiter circuitry is not in until the threshold is reached. Here are a couple products that I have personal experience with that I recommend that I would recommend for this sort of treatment to your mixes. And some respective pros and cons. Now, the first thing I want to do is talk about in the box, because a lot of us are mixing in the box at home, and these sorts of limiters are by far the most misused tool in the recording industry. More than compressors, I mean, digital limiters are just really poorly used in the industry today. And that is why I say it is absolutely essential when using something like this to take RMS and peak information and use it to your benefit. It's not only going to tell you, your RMS is not only going to tell you whether you're mixing way too hot, which is the case most of the times. I get mixes like that mix over here that is louder than a master more often than not, just because people just, oh, it just felt good, you know? And then we end up having to turn the mix down on a record or something like I had spoke. But I generally recommend one of two products to my mixing clients for a in-the-box limiter for your stereo bus. Both stand out for a limiter. They stand out above the crowd sonically, I would say, and easily integrate into workflow. Both have a very clear and simple. Both have very simple and clear controls, and they have very clear readouts of the RMS and peak. And I'm just going to play a little bit of something. And I'm going to. Oh, well, we don't need to listen to it actually. But like, say for instance, this mix right here. This mix was never intended to be made super loud. We wanted to be kind of audiophile with it. So our peaks are normally around -3, -5, well away from 0. And our RMS is around -19. We actually didn't really use any digital limiting in this mix.
Excuse me.
Yes?
Are you talking -3 or -0.3?
Oh, this mix is mostly around -3. I mean, -0.3, you know, -3, it's mostly about, for me, it's mostly about that number.
The RMS.
That number.
Yeah.
Okay. And, you know, I really like this Slate FGX. It's no longer my favorite. But the cool things about this box is the very clear readout. It beats out the other limiter that I'm going to show you. This meter, for me, is very useful. It's very easily readable. The ballistics are pretty understandable. You know, you don't have huge amounts of sway in the amount. It's just got good timing and everything. The only problem with this one is that the software tends to be a little buggy and it's very processor intensive. Now this limiter here, can you hold it? This limiter here is called the FabFilter Pro L. And this one has kind of a different kind of interface. Okay? You have, I'm learning. You have a gain reduction meter, which you do not have. You actually see the gain reduction that you do not see on the Slate FGX. I don't think Steven Slate wants you to know how much you're limiting your mix, because he didn't put a gain reduction. This is your RMS. This line, and I'm sure you can understand why I prefer the RMS meter on the other one. This is a little bit more guesswork. But both these limiters use used appropriately, can sound pretty decent on a mix bus. Now, as far as, so those are in the box options.
Where's the gain reduction meter there?
Oh, the gain reduction meter is this right here. That guy right there. Here, let me just play a little bit more and we'll, okay, you see the red?
Oh,
Whoop, that? Ah. You like that? Okay. So,
Regarding the FGX, the reason there's no limiting metering is because it's not a limiter, it's a clipper.
a clipper.
That's
There
how
you
it
go.
works.
So it wouldn't even, so they wouldn't even be able to give you a readout if they wanted.
Exactly.
My man, my man. So out of the box options, for those of us who, I mix primarily on a, when I do mix for friends and whatnot, I mix on a summing bus, mostly analog. I like to mix analog. My dad owns a Neve Genesis console. So we both like to mix analog, but what do you do? And I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen, these boxes. Generally, I recommend putting something like this right before your capture A to D. To achieve, I'm not talking like tons of limiting here, I'm talking like touching it, right? This is the Pendulum PL2. This is probably the most, this is the most widely used on pop music. It's great with big drums, big percussive material. It's awful on pianos. It's just blatantly distorted. What was that?
We're out of the box.
Yeah, we're out of the box now. So this is the PL2, but this sounds wonderful if you're a pop or a dance producer. I've done wonders with this box. I actually have this as part of my mastering. I have this box too. I actually have all three of these. I like these. This box is the Max Select in PL2. Now this is a more musical, a softer, kind of a more, I would say, kind of has kind of a nice analog character, and I'm sure they would like to tell you that it has that too.
What's the brand name?
This is a Maselec. Who makes them now? Prism Sound?
It's Prism, and
Prism.
Maselec is a division.
Is a Maselec as a division. So you have you have your limiter, but what's also awesome about this box is many of us in the box are dealing with some like pretty awful, especially with cheap Chinese mics. As soon as you add a half dB of high end to anything that was recorded on a cheap Chinese mic, like a bad Chinese mic, I know there's some good Chinese capsules, but you're going to be dealing with severe essiness, especially when you're mixing louder, because those things, S's tend to translate even through harsh limiting. And it has an MS and a stereo de-esser. So in MS mode, it's actually only triggering off of things in the center, like a lead vocal. The last one, and a lot of guys, I know Vanna's husband has some plans. I mean, has a modification for this. One day I'll have to try and have him give it to me. But an Aphex Dominator 2 is super cheap. I think I bought mine on eBay for $200. This is about 2K. This is about 2K. This is a pretty cheap box, but it does wonders when it's properly modded. When someone goes through and kind of takes out some of the stuff meant to interface with kind of some more prosumer gear, this thing when modded can sound pretty awesome as well for someone on a budget. So,
I hear it.
That is out of the
it is.
It's long gone.
But it should be in production because it's actually
This one is, it's still sells, it's a multiband.
multiband. That's the other thing. Yeah, that's the other thing about it. It's multiband, and whereas the other two have no release shaping characteristics on the limiter, this actually has a release time. It also has a density knob. I don't really know what it does. All I know is when you turn it, sometimes it sounds better. What does the density knob really do?
Take the average.
There you go.
And it has a clipper built in.
It does.
There's a limiter and a clipper.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, that box is I've actually been on, I always choose between my analog limiters while mastering. I have three, and I generally choose one, whatever sounds best, and sometimes my modified Dominator actually wins the battle. Now, with all this said, there is a practice that is becoming increasingly common where mixers send their clients a limited or a loud version for approval, and then they completely remove the limiting before they send it to mastering because the mastering engineer wants headroom. Okay, but as we all know, and I don't know why people don't think of this, but when you mix into a limiter heavily, so your clients are happy, and you take that limiter off right before mastering, what's going to happen? Your mix is going to fall apart. It's like taking your compressor off the mix or something. Some people even take the compressor off. Some people mix into the Ozone software. Who makes that? Isotope, which is heavily multibanded. So you have heavily multibanding. You have exciters going crazy. You have MS crazy processing going on, and they'll just take it off. And then they'll send me a mix, and the balances just won't make sense. And I know, hey, man, this is a great mixing engineer that I'm working with here. 9 times out of 10, it's because he took whatever he was using on a stereo bus off. I also think it's an awful idea to just put an L2 on at the very end to sell something to your clients, because it's going to make it, that is the worst time to put a plug-in on your mixes at the very end just to make things loud. It's just more negative than positive, let me tell you. But I'm not saying that we should I'm not saying that we should necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't mind personally for pop music when I need to make something loud. I prefer a little bit of limiting on the mix because it limits the amount of gain reduction I have to do in limiting and compression and clipping to get a master to be as loud as it needs to be. It's prepared for loudness. And just one final thing that I forgot to mention. So these are the kind of more proper ways of limiting. There's also something called digital converter clipping, which will happen. I tell you, of all the masters you hear on pop radio, I can guarantee you they've been clipped at least once, if not both, in the mixing and the mastering stages. 2 completely different stages of clipping, which is just pure distortion in the converters. Now, I will tell you this, that some converters sound better than others when clipped. I can't tell you why. You guys are the gear designers, but I will tell you that a lot of guys use, like, say for instance, a Lavery Gold, a Lavery Blue, certain converters that quote-unquote clip well, okay? Of course, none of you guys would think that they clip well, but in the grand scheme of things, when you're dealing with a converter like, say for instance, I have MyTech converters. You go 0.1 over 0 into a MyTech converter, it results in just awful distortion. And that's because it's a really, really clean, really great converter. It's giving you what you're putting into it. For whatever reason, when you clip some of these other converters, they actually aren't as apparent distortion, like, oh, that's distortion. For some reason, different converters clip differently. The other thing that these converters will do is they have soft clip functions, some which sound better than others. Most soft clipping sounds pretty awful, but like, say for instance, a lot of mastering engineers use the Lavery Gold converters, and that's because there's a +6 digital compression kind of curve thing that you can feed your converter 6 dB hotter than you would if the soft clip function wasn't on, or the soft saturation they call it. So there's a lot of different ways that people go about this, and to talk about that the clipping of the converters, just one more note. That is the most dangerous of any of limiting in the box. The most dangerous thing you can do, especially in a home audio environment where you're mixing at home for whoever, is clip your converters, and that's because a lot of tweeters, a lot of home environments aren't going to really reproduce the artifacts of some of that distortion, and you're going to get to mastering and realize, wow, the mixes are awfully distorted, and that happens more often than not. So take the clipping converters bit with a grain of salt. It's very, very touchy, and should only be done if you really shouldn't ever be done. But if you are trying to get a little bit of level without the sound that sometimes these kind of limiters can get a little mushy when you hit them too hard. So some people do a little bit here, do a little bit on the converters, so on and so forth. Now, for guys like yourselves and like me who would never think of slamming the heck out of our mixes, our hard work, I've developed a system, and I'm sure many of the other mastering engineers have done this as well, is I actually encourage people to bring in, if we're trying to make a master as loud as possible but have it sound good, I will actually have people bring in their mixes into the mastering room to where we can actually adjust. I work with a bunch of guys over at Tony Maserati's, and they actually bring in their mixes, and they turn me on to this Fab Filter Pro L. And what they'll do is they'll actually bring their mixes into mastering, and I will adjust based, sometimes we'll over limit, their mixes for their, sometimes because it feels good to them, sometimes because the clients need something really loud. Another thing that'll happen is their client will send a rough producer mix that is louder than any master you've ever heard. And so in order to get a mix okay, they have to make the mix louder than the producer mix, because then otherwise they're not,
Why master?
Well, exactly. But what we'll do is they'll actually bring their mix in, and we'll actually tweak their Fab Filter Pro L right there in mastering. So if they are truly over limiting and there are severely bad things, which doesn't normally happen with those guys because they're really sharp, but sometimes they'll be doing 3 dB limiting, and in order to get the amount of RMS headroom, the room for the mastering engineer, I'll bring it back. I'll bring their amount of limiting down to 1 dB, or and we'll tweak. And what also this also does is it provides them for an opportunity to listen in one other environment with their mix open. So when they get there, if there's some things that they didn't necessarily hear, when got past them because it was 4 in the morning and they wanted to go home, or whatever, they can, make a small tweak in the mix. The things that normally get by people are like, man, I didn't know that vocal was so SE, or that tamborine's a little loud. We'll just make a small tweak in the master room and call it a day. One other way, and I know it's getting late, so I'm going to wrap up here. Another way of doing this is actually compressing and limiting at the bus level, which I think is something that I would prefer, because things like drums tend to be more resilient sound-wise and tend to have more transient content in a mix than vocals and keyboards and whatnot. Those drums are what tend to be need to have the most limiting. And when you're limiting purely on the stereo bus level, you are limiting the drums mostly, but everything else that is connected to it, everything else in the mix, the vocals, everything. When you limit at the bus levels, it allows you to limit the transients of the drums and leave the vocals and the keyboards and the things that tend to not be so resilient against that limiting untouched. And that's actually one of the practices of those guys as well, is they'll put a lot more limiting on the drum bus so that it frees up their stereo bus, from large amounts of limiting. Now, I know it's getting late, so I'm gonna close.
You just take time for questions, I know you're gonna have a bunch.
Okay. I hope you guys don't hate me.
No.
Blackball. Blackball.
Questions, not
One of these things, one of the final things that I'd like to make known is analog saturation, such as tape and transformer saturation. I know in Kevin was talking about a Red Hot Chili Peppers record where the tape was hit so hard, it was like, and then they took the tape and they just crushed the master, and that's one of the things, the kinds of analog saturation that we engineers kind of like to hear sometimes, or transformer saturation. I mean, we all talk about how great it is once in a while, yeah. But I really like, when I record drums, I like to hit an API freeze a little hard. It's got natural limiting kind of functions built into it. I don't know how. But all I tell you is, on a rock, you get a certain amount of transformer saturation that can have a big effect on a parent level. A digital version of that would be like a Crane Song's head unit. It increases the apparent level without increasing the peak through different forms of like second, third harmonic distortions. And that would be one final, and I kind of just skipped through that real quick, but one final way of adding apparent level to your mixes without making them sound awful. So to kind of close this up, I think the most important thing, and like I said, this isn't about Bernie Becker mastering, this isn't about me. I would recommend whatever you do, when you need to make a record loud, do not send it to somewhere that makes loud records. Develop a relationship with someone who you trust, a mastering engineer you trust, and you guys partner to get it there the right way. If you send it to somewhere that is known for making records loud, and you do not properly prepare your mix and have some sort of back and forth with your mastering engineer, your record is just going to get crushed. If you deal with like a lot of the mastering engineers in here, we'll work with you. If you need it loud, if your client needs it loud, make sure you're working with someone you trust. Make sure you don't just send it off, because you would be surprised how much better your master is going to sound if you're working with someone who has an invested interest in what you're doing as well. And hopefully, I might not have had any converts today, but all I wanted to say is that there is a way to make loud mixes sound better. If you hear me say anything, loud does not always mean super often. We can make things better if we put our minds to it, if we prepare our mixes, if we prepare our recordings. If we know the end product in mind and we don't just slam it all in the end in mastering, your product will be much greater than if it's an afterthought. So, questions?
What do you listen on?
I listen on Lipinski 707s with the Crown Reference 1 monitors.
To that point, one of the things that when I was being interviewed with that producer thing and so forth, he said that a lot of his clients are now mastering with earpods or headphones.
Yep, I get that request all the time.
Do you actually use that as a secondary listening source? And if so, what do you find what is revealed both ways? What are the advantages of doing both?
Well, it isn't about on earbuds what is revealed, it is about what is not revealed.
Correct.
So it's important. If I have a client on the East Coast, he absolutely demands that his masters sound good on earbuds. So I bought a set of Apple earbuds, and I plug it into my $1,500 headphone amplifier, and whatever. No, unfortunately, it's an old headroom amplifier.
Sometimes if it sounds too good, you can't hear what they want to hear anyway, right? You kind of have to see what they're seeing.
Exactly.
It's like we used to mix on Orachon because it sounded like AM radio.
Exactly.
And so I'm just kind of wondering if, when we're mixing, I've noticed that we use a lot of different speakers to reveal different things, but in mastering, you primarily have a key set of speakers you go to. And if you like it there, then you put on the earbuds. Now, do you wind up sacrificing one to the other, or you just make sure it sounds good on earbuds?
Never sacrifice. I always make sure. I spend 60% of my time on a pair of Lipinskis. I probably spend 30% of my time on a pair of Polonis speakers. I don't know if you've seen the Chris Polonis speakers.
Yeah.
They got little tannoy drivers. They sound pretty. The reason I use those is because they're very revealing in the low mids, for whatever reason, to me. And then I spend about 10% of my time on a Bose Wave radio and a pair of radio headphones. Generally, the things that are revealed.
Using the Bose to drive the headphones, you're not listening
No,
to
I listen to Bose or the Grados.
Or the
But the thing is generally the things that are revealed or not revealed on things like the earbuds or my Polonis, I always use alternate sources to help me understand what I'm hearing on my Lipinskis. So sometimes the Polonus will help me understand in a deeper way what is being revealed on my Lipinskis. Because bigger hi-fi speakers tend to handle things a little bit better than a small pair of.
Not knowing those brands, are you talking about midfields or near fields, or can you just describe those in that sense?
You can kind of use the Lipinskis at everything, but I have mine probably about 6 feet away from the listening position all the way around.
And the components are
I am not sure the
10
component.
inch, 12 inch?
Oh, they're MTMs, and they are, I think they're 8-inch mids, and some kind of weird tweeter. I wish I could tell you what it
8
is.
inch mids.
Yeah.
Big 12, do they have a woofer?
We have, there's a sub, 2 subs in my system. So basically, I always look for alternate sources that reveal something that isn't as apparent on a greater pair of speakers. It's never about, it's always about making something better for me, as opposed to, I never like go, this sounds kind of weird on the oratones, on the, or.
And then the Penskes or whatever you call them?
Penskes, yeah.
Are they a smaller near field speaker?
They're pretty big, but they do make a near
So it's a
field.
different variation of the same size speaker. You generally call those a midfield or not a near field?
Yeah, I would call them a midfield. I mean, our situation is a little. We don't have a room as big as we like to have at one point, but we have a really great sounding room. So
No more with the Oratone, no more with the NS10s. Those are
Nope,
now. That's gone a long time.
well, not for everyone, but for us.
For
Yes.
mastering.
For mastering, for us, we don't use them. Yeah.
No, I agree. I never liked the sound.
So you operate in Logic?
No, I have these here for just for the sake, because it runs on my laptop without a HD system. So generally I play out of Pro Tools HD 10 or Sadie, and I have another Sadie system that captures.
So when your client comes in, they bring in a Pro Tools.
They bring in a Pro Tools mix on their own rig. And
On their own rig?
Yeah, and
They bring in their computer?
yes.
And they bring in their converters?
They bring in a lot of the guys I work with are actually laptop producers, and they make excellent sounding mixes on their laptops. The two things that I do want to mention is that I do not use any plugins in my mastering. I just own these for my fun mixing, at home and whatnot, and some production stuff I do on the side. And the other thing is that I didn't mention, guys will bring their computer in, and we have a couple different stem mixing setups, one of which is a Neve Genesis console with a Firewire input. Well, so people will bring in their laptop or their Pro Tools rig, and they'll come out of their Pro Tools rig into our Genesis, and the Genesis actually becomes the audio interface, 32 inputs and 32 outputs wide. So people who didn't necessarily get to mix on a console can run their mix multi-output through a console at unity gain.
That
Benefiting.
never goes to A, that stays in D the whole time.
No, it goes down D Firewire, and there's D to A chips inside the Neve
Before they
console.
mix, so that's an analog mix.
It's an analog mix, and what's nice about that is and I won't try and spend too much time on this, but what's nice about this setup is that you never have a bounce capture of your mix. You're playing your mix directly out through the console, which becomes analog, goes through our analog chain. We hit an A to D converter, and that's the only time it ever goes A to D, D to A at once. A lot of guys, they'll capture their mix through an A to D converter. They'll come out D to A, they'll capture A to D, and then they'll send it to mastering, and then we're going to go. Then they capture it, which is a whole other generation of your mix, and then it goes A to D, D to A in mastering. So it saves a whole generation, you could argue, 2 generations of your mix.
And
Yes.
the analog saturation that you like?
I really like, I tend to try and drive, I have some more colored pieces. I tend to like the sound of the Shadow Hills mastering compressors, transformers. I also have a custom transformer version of a Pultec, which was made for me by Rascal Audio, which has some really nice matched vintage transformers. I do have a Crane Song head unit, which I like sometimes as well, just to provide a little bit of density.
Yes. Do you ever deal with all analog projects, and how do you, what would you recommend for somebody who needs to compete with the loudness wars if it's an all analog project?
Well, if it's an all analog, generally speaking, and I can't tell you why all analog projects tend to be a little, in my just experience, and I have no way of proving this, but tend to be a little bit more resilient against the kind of processing necessary for loudness. It could be the saturation, it just could be the sound stage of the mix on the console. So you're already at an advantage that you've hit some tape, you've hit some iron. If you're talking about all analog, meaning that we are going from an analog tape to actually cut a record, that man is your man, because that's. I haven't been able to bring in a project yet, Kevin, but I'm going to.
Well, but we also have to have a digital download.
Now, for that, you need someone cheap and dirty like myself, who likes to manage their stuff loud. And you know, for you not really having benefit of some. Now, if you're going to make a record, you wouldn't want to have any sort of this kind of process, like an actual physical record. You wouldn't want to process anything like this, because it would ruin things. But for your digital master, you can implement some of this stuff, but chances are you're probably okay. Just send it to someone who makes stuff loud all the time, but who's also willing to work with you. Like I said, don't just send it to whoever just because they make records loud.
In this case, it would have to do with the length of the songs as in relation to how much level you could put on it. On a lacquer.
Well, and that has to do with what that Kevin. Now, song, you know, I fit 80 minutes of music on the CD. You know, for me, the length, and then all as far as loudness is concerned, I don't think record loudness is a factor anymore. The guys, like Kevin said in his thing, the guys who buy vinyl are guys who like audio. So we're audio guys.
Well, no, all the dance music where they put it on disc, they'll have a 7-minute song on a 10-inch.
Most DJs are probably going to rip it off right off the record and run it through something. And I mean,
all right.
The loudness of a disc is not. I mean, of a record is not as much.
Well, I mean, as far as airplay and all of that, you know,
no one that I know plays radio off of records anymore. Now, they will play it off a CD, and then for that, someone like me who makes records loud all the time could make your record compete in that environment. Yes?
I want to say something about loudness that wasn't mentioned. The easiest thing to make loud is when the music is not dense. The harder it is to make it when it's dense. The problem is that the denser it is, people lose attention to detail. When you do it acoustic music is the easiest to make it loud because there's less information taking space besides the natural reverb that happens. The more intense music is, if it's electronic music or metal music, there's more low-end transients that are faster than natural low-end transients. You have to remember, low-end is big wavelengths, and it's not natural for a bass guitar to, you know, on a 40 hertz note to be like that. But there's no room for development in that, in nature. But in some of the music styles, that happens. And that's why to deal with heavier, dense music, and when I say dense, I don't mean dance.
But most of the
it's
time
harder to deal with those transients and get level. One way of getting level is forgetting about the importance of those transients and just saying, they're comparing it to something else, and you just crank it up and everything sounds like, well, you don't have the definition. And that's why acoustic music is very easy to pull up and level, not that I'm taking off or discriminating or anything, it's just that the natural presence is there. And that's why if you have acoustic guitar and electric guitar, and you record them, it's easier to level up both of them to the same RMS peak, and the acoustic one will sound louder. It's less compressed naturally. So usually if you're recording acoustic music, to get high level with it or presence is much easier, especially if you don't have a lot of low end, which most current music has. And just another thing, if you thought the levels here that he played are loud, wait till you move a continent. Go to Europe. And in Europe, the levels are louder. Why? Because they don't need low end as much. Here, they have to have low end because of a fast food thing. You know, it's like, we like low end, we like to feel it. In Europe, the low end is cut. It goes upper, and you just perceive low end, but it's not there. So it's even louder than what you played here. Just as a note.
Earlier you talked about mixing in the box, which is a lot of what you're doing now, because we're forced to. Could you repeat the levels, you're talking about levels, peak versus RMS and maximum peak levels, and ratio to RMS for something that needs to be really loud, all those type things that we all hate.
Absolutely. Well, I would definitely recommend, for someone like me, and every mastering engineer is different, I like to at least be able to, if, like say for instance, okay, so my peak is going to be minus 0.1, okay? If your peak is minus 1, you have to take that into account in your RMS level, because your RMS level is automatically going to be, there's a little math involved here, automatically going to be down. So I like to be able to, because of EQ taking of gain and all sorts of reasons, I like to be able to add at least 2 to 3 dB of apparent level on top of the mixer's level. I prefer 4 to 6 dB. So say for instance you want to get minus 7, I would recommend between minus 15 RMS and minus 12 RMS, because that'll give me between 3 and 5 dB plus your minus 1, your minus 1 peak. So I'll have my 2 to 5, 2 to 6 dB window to raise the level of your mix. So that's what I would recommend for a loud
So
mix.
minus 1 peak, minus 15, 12, 15.
Yes, that's personally for a loud mix, that's where I would go with it.
And it's okay to have a little bit of a speaker to get there.
I think limiters used properly, high quality, especially, you know, whatever you're using in the box. The worst thing I prefer in
Well, you mentioned not taking out the limit.
yeah, people will argue with me, but I always think it's worse to just slap it on at the end. It's always better to mix through it and allow it to shape your mix. And where the digital limiter falls short sonically, because you're reacting to it, because you're living with it, because you're mixing with it, you can make adjustments to better the mix inside the confines of that digital limiter. There are ways to mix into limiter if your gain staging is right, to get a couple of dB of reduction without killing your mix. Is it the best audiophile way of doing things? No, but it allows you to be relevant and sound great. That it?
More questions?
Yes, when you said that you don't use any plugins, right? So you use only the outboard gear,
Yes.
right? You're coming in generally through the Genesis and using those input converters, or that's just on the mix?
That's only for the stem mixes.
So then you're using your Mytex and whatever else,
Yeah.
and then you're going out into these analog boxes. Do you use any tape saturation boxes? Not transformer saturation?
I really wish, there are some boxes that I'd like to get. I'd like to get the Animon ATS1. There's a lot of great kind of, we used to have the Rupert Neve version of it. It was just a little too effective for mastering purposes. But, the tape, the Crane Song head does have a saturation, built in, although that's digital. I do have a lot of boxes that are not analog that I use on a daily basis for digital limiting, and they're not plugins. But I do have a hardware.
And you come back in, through into AES and record in HD.
I record I play back out of HD or Sadie, and then I capture in Sadie.
Capture in Sadie, and never going into like a summing console?
Not for standard stereo amps. Unless I'm doing something crazy, which sometimes is the exact thing it calls for.
Is your suite the same as your dad's, or do you have different places of work there?
What he is calling my room now is our room in Pasadena. I've been there so long that I've made so many changes that it drives me nuts. And we work on.
Where does he master?
He'll master there, but he's always I work on this kind of music a lot. The loud stuff. I do a fair amount of more, kind of audiophile kind of recordings. But my general client base is pop music, R&B, rap, EDM, a lot of EDM.
And your dad?
And my dad generally works on a lot of acoustic music. He does a lot of jazz. His whole workflow is based on is geared towards his client list, and my whole workflow is based towards my client list. One thing we have been able to do is we installed a digital patch base, so we can put all the gear exactly where we want when we show up. So we're working towards a thing. But like I said, he works mostly with Neil Diamond in Los Angeles. At his recording studio, they're always doing stuff, and I'm generally full-time with Manny in Pasadena.
Any reason you use the Sadie?
I like the sound of Sadie. Every version of Sadie, every time a new feature is added, it seems like it doesn't sound as good as Sadie 2, but it still stands to us. It stands to us as a solid with what we put in it sounds darn near what is playing back. It's not like Pro Tools when you put it in input, it sounds one way, and you record. Once you record it, it sounds different. I don't know if you guys have ever had that problem, but it drives me insane. But it's not as bad as Pro Tools 10. But Sadie has never added a click in a CD master where there was not a click. And that I can, I just killed your thing. Yeah, so we have some stuff up here. That says a lot. I need something I can trust, and Sadie has never let me down in that fashion. I've never had 50,000 records made with a dropout on track 7. So.
And we all know it's Becker Mastering in Pasadena. I think it's been a great evening and very informative. I've really enjoyed this. I think Gail has fulfilled his new Sapphire membership requirement eloquently. And I would like to thank him with one big, hellacious Sapphire. Okay, thank you so much, really. That's Rick, one hit lights or somebody over there?